So ladies and gentlemen, a really warm hand for Jayney Goddard.
Thank you very much indeed. I think I probably ought to leave you to sort out the technical end of things here while I talk to you. I'm Jayney Goddard, and it's an absolute pleasure and an honour to be with you here today. I just wanted to take a little time before we actually begin, just to thank everybody who puts this magnificent event together. It's my first time here, and it is such a delight and a privilege to be able to speak with you. So thank you so very much indeed for this opportunity. I also want to do a big shout out for guys I've met already at previous conferences, the AV guys and the sound and all of the people running around behind the scenes that we never really get to see or interact with unless you're one of the speakers. But they work so hard to make all of this come together too. So I just want to say a big shout out to the guys. Thank you very, very much indeed. And thank you for being so kind and looking after me and making sure my presentation works and so on. Thank you, yes. A big round of applause for the guys. Thank you. And anyway, let me give you a little bit of information. I'm a strange character because I straddle two worlds, and I think it's probably best to sort of fess up before I begin and, without further ado, as they say in the great world of public speaking. I am a dyed-in-the-wool complementary medical practitioner. My first discipline was homeopathic medicine. I trained for 7 odd years in homeopathic medicine, and part of that training, my anatomy, physiology, and pathology, was at Imperial College School of Medicine, Science and Technology. So I have a foot in that camp and a very deep understanding of what the reality is when it comes to anatomy, physiology, and pathology. And I think that's incredibly important because everything I'm going to do with you today is going to be based on real, hard science. Okay, so everything I say to you is not wishful thinking, supposition, or even conspiracy theory. Everything I'm going to share with you and we're going to talk about together today is based on real science, real research. Okay, I think it's very important for you to go away with that message. I also, following the homeopathic training, which was very, very long, I bolted on other disciplines, as many of us practitioners do, and I know that we've got many practitioners in the audience today, culminating most recently with studying mind-body medicine with the father of mind-body medicine at Harvard Medical School. And again, that's very, very dear to my heart. So when people say to me, hey, Jayney, what do you do with patients? I have an international patient base. I have patients from all over the world. I tend to kind of cut things short and say, well, I practice regenerative mind-body medicine, which is, you could say in America they call it anti-aging, or over here, they'll call it sort of, getting younger and younger by the day. But essentially I help people stop and even reverse their aging process, which also encompasses stopping and even reversing the chronic diseases, those conditions and diseases that we assume will come to us as a factor of aging. That's actually not true. We don't have to get sick as we age. We can actually stay relatively healthy right into a ripe old age. So, what are we talking about today? Well, today I'm going to be talking about the pharmaceutical industry and how they are curtailing our rights and access to personal health freedom and what we as individuals can do about that. You'll see with this first quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. And it would be awfully convenient, would it not, if we were to become silent about our most important resource, which is actually our health. Because without our health, we become sheeple, we become unable to fight back, we become unable to do anything, and we become even more pawns of industry and conglomerates. So, when they talk about public speaking and they do all sorts of public speaking training, they always tell you, well, you should really start your talk with, perhaps a joke or an anecdote or something to kind of, get the audience on your side. Well, I'm going to start with a magic trick. Okay? It's a very, very fast magic trick, and so I want you to look very, very carefully, okay? I'm going to count you in, I want you to observe, and then I'll count you out, and you'll see, you'll see whether it's been a very good and successful magic trick or not, okay? So ready, steady, go. 1, 2, 3. Okay, did you see it? No, okay. The magic trick is the fact that I'm standing here in front of you today, okay? 13 years ago, I was in a hospice. I was given 2 weeks to live. I was at death's door, and I was completely immobile. I'd gone down to 5 stone. I'd catabolized all of my muscles. I had absolutely no movement in my body whatsoever. I was just a little fetal bunch and ball of absolute horrific pain. The situation was that I had developed a condition called rheumatoid arthritis, and I had the most aggressive form that you could possibly ever have. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because I want you to understand and walk away from this, if there's nothing else you walk away with, than the absolute knowing that there is always, always hope. There is always light at the end of the tunnel if you choose to see it. There's always something that can be done, whether it's for quality of life or whatever that is. I nearly lost hope, and I nearly chose to exit, but there was something that pulled me back, and that's a story for another day. But the way that people always say to me, but Jayney, you were there, you were staring death in the face, you were completely immobile, how did you change that situation? And I changed that situation by using the techniques and lifestyle approaches that I'm going to be sharing with you. And this is all about how we can take back control. So I hope that this is going to be useful for you. And I'm going to go through this presentation, and there will be time for questions and answers at the end, because I think it's very important that we can answer your questions as best we can within the allotted time. And also, when I finish, I'll be outside. There's going to be a break after this, so I'll be outside. So if there's anything, if you're shy or you don't want to put your hand up for whatever reason, I'll be outside and we can actually have a chat out there as well, if that works for you. Okay? So, moving swiftly on. Moving very swiftly on, not. Do I need to turn this? You know what? Sometimes you need to turn it on and turn it off again. Here we go. So the title is today, Big Pharma is Succeeding in Restricting Our Personal Health Choices, How to Balance This and Find Our Own Ways to Healthy Living. I'm Jayney Goddard. I have a Master of Science degree. I'm president of the Complementary Medical Association, which is the world's largest professional membership body for very highly qualified, elite complementary medical practitioners. I'm also a fellow of the Royal Society of Medicine and a fellow of the Royal Society for Public Health. So let's look at why complementary medicine is growing, first of all, because I'm sure that you realize that it actually is. Well, it's because many people don't fully trust conventional medicine. There have been so many high-profile blunders in recent years that have actually cost lives. In fact, these conventional medical blunders injure over 600,000 people every year in the UK alone, with 200,000 of those being seriously injured and 40,000 people dying every year as a result of these. That's close to 100 people a day, isn't it? If you had a plane crash every 2 days, that's what we'd be talking about. That would make the news, wouldn't it? So why are these deaths not making the news? These are avoidable blunders. This is not heroic medicine. This is not life-saving stuff where simply they did their best but the person couldn't be saved. These are medical blunders. These are the wrong anesthetic being used. These are things like the wrong medicine being injected. These are blunders that are totally avoidable. So, one of the problems with complementary medicine is everybody says, but it's not scientific. Well, I beg to differ. I wrote a book for Collins, which I call the Big Fat Encyclopedia. Its proper name, because it's a huge, great tome, is Complementary and Alternative Medicine, the Scientific Verdict on What Really Works. And my job was to take over 10,000 published random controlled trial studies and to turn those into English so that they could be understood by doctors, because most doctors don't actually read full research papers. And that was reported in The Lancet, by the way. That's not me being disparaging at all. And so what happens is they tend to flip to the end of to the paper, to the conclusions, read that and say, okay, well, that means whatever. Most of those conclusions, again, printed in the Lancet, are that a lot of those conclusions don't bear up or reflect what's actually in the published paper itself. So there's a lack of science in conventional medicine. Now, what we're seeing in this particular chart is that this is actually from the British Medical Journal's website, Clinical Evidence. So what we're seeing is that actually, see if I can see this, yeah, we know the beneficial medicines and approaches that are being used in medicine today, we know that only 11% of those are actually known to be beneficial, which means that there's an outstanding, massive percentage, 89%, that we really don't know what they do. We've got some that are likely to be beneficial, 7% are trade-off between benefits and harms, but we're also being prescribed medicines that are unlikely to be beneficial, likely to be ineffective or harmful, or a full 50% of them that are actually of completely unknown effectiveness. Now, that's not science, is it? That's not science. So why is this even happening? Why are we allowing it to happen? Well, the truth is we've been conned into this medical model. Now, before you run away with the idea that I'm anti-medicine, I'm actually not. My own mother is a type 1 diabetic. If it wasn't for insulin, I wouldn't have a mother. She would have died in the 70s. She's incredibly well and healthy because, yes, she uses her insulin, but she also uses all of the approaches I'm going to share with you today. And she has none of the problems that you might expect to see in a diabetic, type 1 diabetic that's been diagnosed for that length of time. So let's also look at the pharmaceutical industry. So we've established so far that conventional medicine is actually not terribly scientific. But I want to talk to you further about how budgets are spent within the big pharmaceutical industry, because I think this is also incredibly telling. You would think, wouldn't you, that most of the money in the pharmaceutical industry would be spent on research and development and finding cures for things. Alas, not. The only money that's spent on actual clinical trials is this little tiny piece of pie down here. 130 million. Look at this big one here, 15 billion, is spent on detailing. What's detailing, I hear you ask? Detailing is taking doctors out for lunch. Detailing is taking doctors out on holidays to Costa Rica or wherever, on medical conferences, fact-finding missions, etc., etc. Isn't that quite scary? Again, there's no science. Now, I really do think, actually, that we shouldn't really call ourselves patients anymore. We should call ourselves customers. It's kind of like a sort of a brain switch, isn't it, that makes us realize, well, you know, we are customers. We should be getting a better service. But anyway, I just thought it was quite interesting. So big pharma, wrongdoing. Let's put just how many fines the pharmaceutical industry has had over the last 5 years into perspective. This is for wrongdoing. This is for actual criminal activity. The net wealth of the UK in 2014 was, now it's measured in dollars, I'm afraid, but anyway, 14.175 billion, okay? The fines paid by big pharma companies over the last 5 years totaled 13.048 billion. So over the last 5 years, these people have had to pay fines that are almost equivalent to the entire net wealth of the UK. That's a hell of a lot of money, wasn't it? GlaxoSmithKline had to pay $3 billion just a couple of years ago for basically lying about what their medicines did. And there was also the small, pesky, annoying matter of them going to Africa and experimenting on children with vaccines. And these children, of course, couldn't give informed consent, but neither could their parents or guardians because they couldn't read the paperwork. It's criminal. It's beyond evil. And that's what we're dealing with. It is evil. Okay, so those, as I say, those fines of criminal activity. This is not them just kind of, making a mistake. This is actual conscious wrongdoing. So what can we do to ensure our health and well-being on all levels? Physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So first of all, we need to look at our diet. Diet and nutrition is the underlying support mechanism that is of the utmost importance in developing a resistance to disease, whether inflammatory, viral, bacterial, fungal, or other. Now, the reason I've bolded inflammatory, if you can see that up there, is because inflammation is that mechanism that underlies and drives all chronic disease. So whether it's heart disease, cancers, arthritis, cardiovascular incidents, even neurological conditions like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, there is an underlying inflammation that is going on. If we can combat that, we are really streets and streets ahead of anything that conventional medicine has to offer, because if we make lifestyle changes, we can combat inflammation and keep it under control. Now, with my condition, I've actually managed to get my condition completely under control. So I don't have any what they call disease activity, no rheumatoid arthritis activity. I've got joint damage, which I've sustained over the years, but, you know, I'm also an ex-ballet dancer, so I probably would have had that anyway. So, you know, you get on with life, don't you? But I've been able to turn around and stop something in its tracks that's technically not stoppable. And I forgot to add, after I came out of the hospice all those years ago, I was then completely immobile and non-weight-bearing and in a wheelchair for 10 years. I had to learn to walk again. So as I said to you, it is a magic trick, me standing here in front of you. I was told I'd never ever walk again, let alone be able to stand up, dance, or move around. I now travel all over the world lecturing and seeing patients and so on. So I just want to tell you this. I'm not saying, aren't I clever? I'm saying there's always, always hope. So let's go back to nutrition. My advice to you is eat organic food wherever possible. Immune systems like to be fed properly without excess chemicals, and I'm sure that we're all on the same page with that. We all know that that makes absolute logical sense. My ideal advice to you would be to follow a plant-based vegan whole foods diet. Why is that? Well, it's because, and again, everything I'm telling you is based on research, it's because there's a huge amount of supporting data for this. The AHS 1 and 2 studies, that's the Adventist health studies, that were conducted since 1960 in excess of 96,000 people, so that's a big sample size, showed that a plant-based vegan whole foods diet promotes longevity, resistance to the diseases of aging, so the cancers, heart disease, arthritis, type 2 diabetes, etc., and reduces inflammation, that pesky, lethal underlying thing that happens to cause these diseases. So what is it that Adventists, why study Adventists? Well, because they're largely vegetarian. Well, they're all vegetarian, largely vegan, and they tend not to drink alcohol or have tea or coffee. So those confounding factors are taken out of the equation. They're an easier group to study. And so it's very, very handy. So, of course, there are certain things we also need to avoid. Sugar, alcohol, trans fats, burnt foods, animal origin foods. And then we also need to start to think about what else can we put into our diets to actually really positively help ourselves. So I'm going to share some of my really sexy secrets with you now, herbs that you really need to get friends with. We're going to be looking at anti-inflammatory herbs that are proven to optimize our immune response. So the first one I want to look at is turmeric. It's the yellow herb, or yellow sort of color that you see in curries and so on. Turmeric, there's an extract of turmeric called curcumin that is the active constituent in turmeric. It's antipathogenic, which means that it prevents you from catching nasties, bacteria, virus, and so on. It is antihypertensive, therefore it reduces your blood pressure. It's anti-inflammatory, helping you to avoid all those nasty diseases that we spoke about earlier. And it reduces tumor formation. It's anti-cancer, so it's anti-proliferative. So if you had a tumor, it stops tumors from spreading. It lowers your cholesterol. It increases mucin. And it's antibiotic. So, and it's also one of those herbs that's being really heavily studied as a form of natural chemotherapy, whereby it's able to target cancerous cells and leave healthy cells alone, unlike conventional chemo. We're also going to look at ginger. Put some ginger in your diet. A, because it's delicious, B, because it's anti-inflammatory, analgesic, so it reduces your conception of pain. It suppresses the inappropriate production of what we call prostaglandins and leukotrienes. Those are two hormonal chemical messengers that will act to increase inflammation in your body. Ginger suppresses the production of those, so it actually acts as an anti-inflammatory in that way. And it prevents platelet aggregation. You've heard of the term sticky blood, where your blood gets very sticky and it causes clots in your system. So ginger will actually prevent this from happening. And it's also a very strong antioxidant, so it's positively good for you. So it also works as a cardiotonic. It strengthens the heart. Sounds like an old wives' tale, doesn't it? It's a heart strengthener, but it actually does. And we've got garlic as well. I know you know the wonders of garlic, I'm sure, but let's recap. So garlic is anti-inflammatory again, analgesic, so it prevents or lowers your perception of pain. It, again, suppresses the inappropriate production of inflammatory cytokines, the prostaglandins and the leukotrienes. So again, that's keeping your inflammation levels down. It also prevents platelet aggregation, which is where you've got blood cells, red blood cells, all kind of clumping together, eventually forming clots. And it's also an antioxidant. And it's also a cardiotonic. So again, incredibly good for your heart, and I'm sure you know that. You can see where I'm going with all of this, can't you? What I'm suggesting is you probably ought to eat a lot of curries with the garlics and the ginger and the turmeric, so curries are very good for you. But I also want to talk about another sexy secret, which is resveratrol. Resveratrol, I've got a lovely picture here of red grapes, but it's also usually sourced from other sources as well. But red grape skins contain resveratrol. And it's a wonderful substance because it's anti-inflammatory, antioxidant. It is anti-cancer and anti-proliferative, so it stops tumours from forming in the first place, and then it stops them from spreading if you happen to get a tumour. It's also anti-angiogenic. Now, what that means is that if you were to have a tumour, the way tumours grow is they have to have blood vessels growing into them to keep them alive. So what resveratrol does is it stops those blood vessels from forming, so it starves tumour of oxygen and nutrients. Okay? And it's a form of being studied as a form of natural chemo. It's anti-cardiofibrotic. Cardiofibrosis is where you get hardening of the heart. I'm sure you've heard of that, so resveratrol helps with it. And it's anti-aging. Now, one of the really interesting things about resveratrol is it has an action on the ends of your chromosomes. The ends of your chromosomes have these little caps on them called telomeres, okay? And you can actually work out your biological age by the length of these telomeres, these little caps on the ends of your chromosomes. Every time your chromosomes split, it's like making a copy of a photocopy of a photocopy. You know how the quality gets less and less and less each time you copy. Well, what happens with resveratrol is it actually preserves those ends of your telomeres, keeping you biologically young. And it's quite interesting. And in people who are inordinately stressed, telomere length really shrinks. And there are two ways of getting your telomere length to grow again. One is through taking resveratrol and a couple of other herbs as well, and also through mindfulness-based meditation, which we'll come on to later. So, I also want to talk about rosemary. Rosemary got me through my dissertation. It really perks your brain up and your memory up no end. Rosemary supports the anti-inflammatory action of vitamin D3. Now, you all know how we are more than 50% likely to have insufficient levels of vitamin D3 in our blood. Did you know about that? If you live in the northern hemisphere. Well, one of the interesting things about rosemary is that it actually helps and it supports vitamin D3 in your body. So you do need to get more D3 in, and the best way of doing that is through a liquid form of supplement that you can actually drop into your mouth, under your tongue, take it sublingually, because there's no way, and I would love you to get out in the sunshine, but really, come on, it's, we're in the middle of summer, and a day like this, we can't guarantee to be able to get enough sunlight. I spend half my time in Florida, and I am a sun worshipper, and I'll be quite honest with you, I went for a blood test recently, and my vitamin D levels were on the floor. So, I'm supplementing, particularly D. I'm very careful about supplements. I don't just recommend supplements left, right, and centre, but strategically, supplements are very important. Rosemary is a potent COX-2 inhibitor, which is jargon for cyclooxygenase 2 is something that is produced when your body goes into inflammation. And so it's one of those targets in conventional medicine. If we can suppress the production of this thing called COX-2, we won't get the end result of inflammation. So yes, they did that. They produced some fantastic drugs that were COX-2 inhibitors. One was called Celebrex, one was called Vioxx. Vioxx is one of the reasons the pharmaceutical industry got so badly sued, was because they buried the evidence that showed that, yes, you can suppress this with drugs, but unfortunately your patients then die of heart attacks and strokes. Many people died, particularly with Vioxx. So rosemary does the same job, but without those inconvenient side effects. So it's, we're erring on the side of rosemary is our friend, we like her. Okay, so it's also an antioxidant, it's anti-cancer, and again, it fights against lipid peroxidization. So essentially, in proper words, it keeps your low-density lipids low, and which means that it keeps your bad cholesterol down. So utilizing rosemary is a really sensible thing to do if you possibly can. So really, the road to total well-being begins here. What we're going to talk about now is using the very best approaches in complementary medicine to safeguard our health and well-being. So I want to just discuss with you some of the interesting types of complementary medicine that are out there, how they can help you, what the evidence is for them. And I go around the world teaching at medical schools, teaching doctors and medical students what the evidence base is for complementary medicine and how we can actually incorporate these into our lives. And do they work? Okay? So we're going to start off with homeopathic medicine. Well, I would do, as a homeopath. It's a complete system of medicine. I'm sure we've probably got homeopaths in the audience. Homeopathic medicine is one of the soft targets for the pharmaceutical industry. They have very, very well-organized groups that are dedicated and purposed to attack complementary medicine. Now, this is not conspiracy theory stuff or mumbo-jumbo. As far as Big Pharma is concerned, I personally am public enemy number one because I'm one of those people that goes on television and talks about complementary medicine sensibly and referring to research and so on, and they absolutely don't like that. They hate it, in fact. They much prefer it when they get somebody on who really is a little bit hippy-dippy-trippy and isn't going to really make much sense. They really don't like it when you can speak from the research base. So that's what I want to talk to you about now. The reason homeopathy is a soft target is because in homeopathic medicine we have a totally preposterous scenario. In homeopathic medicine, what we have is a situation where we're taking substances and we are highly and repeatedly diluting them and then shaking them in such a way as the signature or the energy of that original substance is retained in these successive dilutions. And so essentially, the tenet of homeopathic medicine is the more essentially dilute something gets, the more of a profound action it has on the body. Now, the intriguing thing is that a different branch of science entirely is starting to pay into homeopathy with supporting evidence. Would you believe that evidence coming from the petrochemical industry is showing that the more you can dilute something and the more that you can shake it in a particular way produces nanoparticles? And these nanoparticles essentially have way more bang for their buck than they actually should do. So it's really intriguing to find that a different branch of science is actually supporting homeopathic medicine. What we still don't know, though, is once you put a remedy into the body, how it then actually works. That's science that we will discover in probably the next 50 years or so, I imagine. But then again, the same can be said for a lot of conventional medicine. There are so many conventional medicines that you put into the body, actually nobody can tell you how they work. Until very, very recently, nobody actually knew how aspirin worked. So, fair's fair, actually, isn't it? So don't judge it. Don't judge it negatively. Some of the research, just one huge study that I wanted to share with you was that if you remember, back in 1918, there was what was called the Spanish flu that killed, estimates vary, between 50 to 100 million people worldwide. It was absolutely horrendous. I wrote a couple of books which are actually outside. One is The Survivor's Guide to Bird Flu. The other is The Survivor's Guide to Swine Flu. So all of these approaches that I'm talking about today are all fully detailed in the books. And I particularly looked at what happened in these horrific epidemics and what we could actually do about it. So the books are very interesting from a sort of an epidemic perspective as well as lifestyle stuff. So in 1918, homeopathic medicine stood head and shoulders above conventional medicine. And why was that? Well, because conventional medicine really only had a couple of options to offer. So they had really pretty much aspirin was what they were giving to people, and of course it wasn't working. Now you could argue and say, yes, but of course we're so much more advanced now. That was 1918, nearly 100 years ago. But the truth of the matter is, no, we don't have anything different to offer. Do you remember the Tamiflu problem, where people were given Tamiflu and then they started getting absolutely horrendous side effects? Do you remember that? And then it worked out that actually Tamiflu doesn't protect you against flu. And then they said, oh, no, don't worry, there's going to be a flu vaccine. In fact, there's a flu vaccine every year. Well, the preposterousness of the flu vaccine is the fact that viruses that cause flu do a very good job of mutating constantly. That's a virus's job. That's what it's supposed to do. And so the issue is that it takes 6 months to grow a vaccine once you decide which virus. So once you scientifically look into your crystal ball, not very scientific, is it? But that's what essentially they have to do. They have to look into a crystal ball, make their best guess, stab in the dark as to how that virus is going to mutate and how it's going to look in 6 months' time. Well, nobody can actually do that. That's ridiculous. That is just preposterous. So anyway, so when people encourage you to go and get your flu vaccine and run the risk of sleeping sickness, narcolepsy, etc., it's all based on smoke and mirrors. Actually, everybody, I'm sorry to say this, but it's bullshit. It really, truly is. So we're all on the same side then, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so the thing is, but the NHS is having to pay these bills for these medicines that are just ludicrous. There's no actual science in vaccination for flu. Nuts. Anyway, so going back to homeopathy. Homeopathy, it worked incredibly well. In the Spanish flu, people using homeopathic medicine, the death rate was less than 1%, as opposed to deaths in those using allopathic medicine or conventional medicine were in excess of 30%, which is very telling. So homeopathy was working very, very well. Conventional medicine, not so much. Now, are these small studies? Are these little groups of people? Who was reporting these? Well, actually, the cohort sizes, or the study sizes, were 26,000 in one record and 24,500 in another. Many other examples showed the same statistics. Now, what's interesting about this is that these were army bases. These were soldiers who were being, these stats come from army bases. This is why we've got such big sample sizes or cohorts. This is why we know this information. And these doctors were not homeopaths, they were conventional medical doctors reporting this, and what they did was they looked at what was working because they wanted to save their men. And they realized that conventional medicine was killing them off or not doing anything at all, and they realized that homeopathic medicine, which was quite acceptable in those days and was a very normal form of medicine to be used, was actually saving people's lives. There are many other pieces of research, lots of them in vitro. So it means that we've recently shown that if you introduce a particular type of homeopathic medicine into a petri dish full of breast cancer and normal cells, the homeopathic medicine will kill the breast cancer cells while leaving the normal cells to grow and flourish and be healthy. There are many, many trials now that show that homeopathic medicine is far more adept at healing than anybody's ever given it credit for. And it's interesting because the people attacking homeopathic medicine have gone horribly quiet since the research has started really coming out. It's been a rash of research, particularly coming out of Brazil, Cuba, and China. And it's interesting because Cuba and China have no profit motive in medicine because they are communist countries, and therefore they don't need to sell drugs to people. There's no profit motive there. They just need to keep people healthy and alive. So let's look at other systems of medicine. Traditional Chinese medicine is also a fantastic option for you. I love systems of medicine that are completely holistic. Traditional Chinese medicine is wonderful because it incorporates and encompasses herbs, acupuncture, lifestyle, and so much more. And one of the best things you can do for yourself is to take yourself off and learn Tai Chi, Qigong, and all of those sorts of really gentle, but actually incredibly effective medical exercises. And also Ayurvedic medicine that breaks us down into different doshas, vata, pitta, kapha, or combinations of those. But again, it's complete lifestyle medicine. It prescribes exercise, it prescribes music, it prescribes love, joy, wonder, food, all sorts of fantastic things that lighten our souls, gladden our hearts, and actually make it worthwhile being alive. I also want to talk to you about exercise. Now, exercise is always a pesky thing. The reason I bring it up now is because everybody's saying, oh, I read in the Daily Mail that blah-de-blah-de-bloody-blah-de-blah. And to be quite honest with you, it's very confusing, especially in the Daily Mail, the Daily Fail, because they constantly contradict themselves, don't they? Have you noticed that? Anyway, so let's talk about exercise. Well, the research says, okay, and this is proper good research in big studies, if you can possibly do half an hour of walking a day, 5 times a week, that is very, very good, and that will stave off heart disease, inflammation. It will keep it just keeps everything moving. As human animals, we're designed to move. We're designed to walk. Our hips and our knees and our legs, we're designed to be able to walk. Okay, so please try to get as much walking in as you possibly can. It also staves off dementia and keeps your brain young. People who walk for half an hour a day, at least 5 days a week, have far, far better cognitive functioning than people who are sedentary. Also, you might want to look into HIIT, high-intensity interval training. HIIT, I'm sure you've probably seen a little bit about, perhaps in the media. It's where you do that very intense portion of exercise, followed by a less intense, followed by a really intense, followed by a less intense, followed by a really intense, and you do this cycle 7 times. So the idea is that you would perhaps be on a treadmill, or you'd be running, or you'd be doing whatever it is that you as an individual can do, that you can get your heart rate up, only for a period of, say, 30 seconds, and then you take it down again, perhaps for 45 seconds, you take it up again for 30 seconds, you take it down for 45. If you can do that 3 times a week, you strengthen your body, you reduce your blood sugar levels, you reduce your fat levels, you increase your muscular levels, and more importantly, you increase your levels of human growth hormone. Human growth hormone is something that we produce from our childhood right the way to our early 20s, then it kind of just drops off and plummets. Human growth hormone is what keeps us intelligent, it keeps our brains active and learning, it keeps our muscles strong, and really lean, not full of fat, but lean muscle. It keeps our fat levels lower. It really upregulates our sex drive, and it improves our ability to go out and be sociable and to talk to people and all sorts of things. So if you're doing high-intensity interval training, it actually increases your levels of human growth hormone. And it's well worth doing that, because the effects of that, when you're introducing it naturally into the body by exercise, are absolutely nothing short of miraculous. Okay? The trick, though, is if you do high-intensity interval training, what you've got to do is do it at your own pace. Don't push yourself, because you'll just hate this if it's too much of a push for you and you won't stick to it. The second trick is try not to eat carbohydrates for an hour to an hour and a half after that exercise session, because as soon as you introduce a carbohydrate into your body, that production of human growth hormone actually stops producing, okay? So you want to not have a carb, so no breads or cakes or fruits or anything that has sugar in it, okay, of any description. Avoid that for an hour to an hour and a half after a HIIT session. Another system of medicine that I want to talk to you about is water-only supervised fasting. This is a very exciting thing. It's been around for quite a while, but if you were combating a chronic disease. There are certain types of condition that it's contraindicated in, particularly metastatic cancer. You cannot do water-only supervised fasting. But if you had, let's say, type 2 diabetes, if you did a supervised, it has to be medically supervised water fast, your type 2 diabetes would be a long and distant memory within a week. It's as profound as that. I've seen some extraordinary changes in people who've done water-only supervised fasting. If you'd like to talk to me about, or you want to know more about that, I can recommend a couple of places in America, and I think there's a place here in the UK that does it as well. But again, this is all about the wisdom of the body. Why am I bringing it up now? Because I want to emphasize that our bodies actually do know best if we listen to them and we don't keep introducing synthetic drugs and chemicals into our bodies that are actually anathema to our systems. So the idea of fasting is you allow your body to rest. You think about animals. What do they do if they get sick? They go off into the wild, don't they? And they just lie down and they sleep and they rest. If you're doing water-only supervised fasting, you're not even allowed to get out of bed unless you have to go wee. It really is just absolute bed rest and just water. It's very hard to do, but it really does work. So I'm happy to tell you more about that. I've written quite a lot about it and know some of the top doctors in the world that do this. One of the other things I want to talk to you about is the importance of meditation. Meditation cannot be overestimated in its effectiveness. It improves us on every measure of health and well-being that you care to look at. So whether you're doing transcendental meditation, whether you're doing the sort of relaxation responses as popularized by Dr. Herbert Benson, whether you're doing guided meditation, any of those, all are tremendously helpful. So please look into it if you're not already meditating. And mind-body medicine. Well, mind-body medicine it explores that link between, obviously, our minds and our bodies. And it's a way of looking at the body as a whole. And there's a whole sector of medicine now that's actually looking into this. And again, if you would like to look at the relaxation response, it was actually developed by Dr. Herbert Benson at Harvard Medical School, under whom I studied. You can find out a lot about that. In fact, at the end of this, I'm going to put my email address up on the screen for you, and also the Complementary Medical website, Complementary Medical Association website, I should say, because what we have is a monthly e-newsletter. It's not all sales, it's not trying to sell you anything at all, it's completely free to receive, but it's my update of all of the latest natural health research from around the world. If you would like to receive that, just simply go to the website and click on the newsletter, little icon at the top, send me the newsletter. We don't spam you, we don't give your details out to anybody at all, it's just for us, but it's a way of keeping yourselves completely up to date with all healthcare. The Complementary Medical Association website itself too is, at last count, 7,500 pages of fully referenced information about complementary medicine and natural health care. It's the ultimate resource about this field. So again, if you want to take a look at that, it's a great resource, totally free to access, and there are also great lists of some of the best practitioners in the world for you there as well. The other vitamin N that I want to talk to you about is actually vitamin N standing for nature. Fantastic research has come out that talks about the power and of well-being that we get from being in nature. It is just the most extraordinary, uplifting thing, I think you'd all agree. But again, every measure of health improves when you spend time out in nature, walking around, just looking at greenery, listening to the birds, looking at the river, whatever it is that you're doing, connecting to nature, ideally barefoot, is profoundly powerful, profoundly good for you. I also want to talk about using essential oils to pathogen-proof your environment. So we've talked about all the lifestyle things that you can do for yourself, but what about your environment? Well, there are so many wonderful tricks that you can do. Say, for example, it's flu season, you don't want to get flu. There are two things that we're going to talk about right now. The first one is spritzing your environment with essential oils. What I do is I get one of those little spray bottles, a couple of drops of lavender oil, a couple of drops of tea tree, and then fill it up with water. Spritz the environment. You've just germ-proofed your environment with no nasty chemicals. It's always a good thing to do. And in fact, actually, when I was writing my dissertation, I did the same thing, but I was spritzing myself with rosemary oil. So if you've got anybody coming up for high pressure, really, really ridiculously highly stressful exams or anything like that, get them to spritz themselves with rosemary. It makes your mind just kind of sparkle, and it actually makes you more retentive, so you remember more, and it just kind of improves your cognitive function. If you have anybody, any older folks perhaps with neurological disorders, particularly with Alzheimer's, you might want to spritz the room with lavender oil. Lavender oil has been shown to dramatically reduce the incidence and severity of anxiety in Alzheimer's patients. So it's an incredibly beautiful kind of thing that you can do for them too. And of course, don't forget a couple of drops of lavender oil on your pillow at night if you want to get some really lovely deep sleep. And also, one of the greatest breakthroughs in medicine ever was hand washing. So again, if it's flu season, do the sensible things. Simply take a leaf out of Semmelweis's book and just wash your hands. Keep washing your hands, not till you get OCD, obviously, but just keep washing your hands just to make sure that you're not transferring microbes from place A to place B. It's extraordinary. A very, very simple thing like this has saved so many lives the world over. So if we are heading towards doom and gloom, and we do get a really nasty bout of flu, even one of those pandemic-type flus, this is just one tip that can actually really transform and dramatically improve your chances of even surviving. So just to finish and to sum up, these are the take-home messages that I'd just like you to go away with, and then we'll do some questions and answers. So first of all, eat right. Remember what I said about your veggies and your fruits and making them organic and making sure that you're having, ideally, lots of smoothies. Just get as much nutrition into your system as you possibly can through fruits and veggies. Live right. Smile, laugh, and be happy. Take time for yourself. Connect to nature and your purpose. Going out meditating in nature just kind of reveals your purpose to you. It's just beautiful. Finally, express love whenever, however you can. And remember that kindness, compassion, and gratitude are the real keys to lifelong immune protection and robust well-being. So I'm going to leave it there, ladies and gentlemen, and I will open the floor up to questions and answers. And I just want to thank you for being an absolutely wonderful, wonderful audience. Thank you for having me. Thank you, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jayney.
Very welcome. How are we doing for time? Oh, good. Okay, so we've got a quarter of an hour for any questions and hopefully some answers. Does anybody have any burning questions at all that they would like to? Oh, there's a hand up over here. We have this lady over in the corner this side. Sorry, I'm just pointing over.
If you could please wait for the microphone to come to you, thank you.
That's it.
I would like to ask if you can tell us anything about oxygen therapy, which I understand is very beneficial and used in America, I think, but in this country it's not promoted much at all. I'm not talking about the oxygen bottle and things like that that are dispensed.
Are you talking about ozone therapy?
Yeah, ozone, yes, and oxygen therapy.
All right, yes. Yeah, it's an interesting therapy. The idea is that you are breathing ozone, but also having insufflation. So essentially, wherever you have an entrance in your body, ozone is kind of bubbled into you. The idea is that it keeps pathogens at bay. So essentially viruses, bacteria, fungi, etc., etc. In my experience, I have seen this work with patients, and in my experience, it does actually seem to be helpful. So it's worth looking into. Thank you. But don't be tempted to make your own, though. There are certain people who are selling ozone machines and so on, and there are certain problems with that. It's a bit too complex to go into right now, but I would always say go and see a practitioner. And you can find practitioners on the CMA website, actually. So, yeah, thank you. Great question. Okay.
And we have a question here at the back.
Okay. See you through the lights.
Yes, you talked about being in nature.
Yes.
We came across about a year ago the theory of the benefit of walking bare feet
Grounding.
Grounding.
Yes.
And recently came across this thing that if you've actually can touch and get your hands in earth, it's actually an antidepressant.
Yes.
So this has got huge implications for all the kids who are desk-bound and not getting out and getting dirty.
You're absolutely right, yes, thank you for that. Very, very important, yes. There are certain microbes in earth that lift depression, which is really wonderful to know. Also, did you know, and what you said is a wonderful testimony, there's also this, you know how good it feels in autumn to go kicking through the autumn leaves, and you know how much fun that is, and it makes you feel like a little kid. They've actually discovered that there are fungi in the autumn leaves as they decompose that kind of kick up into the air, and those fungi are feel-good fungi, and they're actually really, really good for your mind and body and your spirit, and they make you feel absolutely wonderful and happy. So you're sort of getting the benefit of acting like a little kid, but also what's happening is you're breathing in these feel-good fungi. So it's a great question, thank you. Anything else? Anybody else? Yes, lady in the front.
In layman's terms, the principles of how it works, if you go to a homeopath and say, I've got, bad back or whatever it is, do they have to take, do they treat each person absolutely individually, or is it a sort of generic approach to doing it? Because I know they introduce, apparently, I don't know much about it, they introduce a little bit of the disease into your body and then have a reaction. Is that right? Or
Okay. The question is about homeopathic medicine, and essentially, do homeopaths treat all people individually? The answer is yes. If you are dealing with a classically trained homeopath, they will take you if you've got a chronic condition, which means it's long-lasting and it's not just going to resolve itself, okay? So let's say you're presenting, let's say if I had, as a homeopath, if I've got 10 people presenting to me with eczema, I can guarantee you I will prescribe a different homeopathic medicine for each of those 10 people, because I'm not prescribing on the eczema, I'm prescribing on that person's individual constellation of symptoms. So what is it about that person that makes them a unique human being? What's their history? What's their family history? How do they react to things? How are their emotions? We take a very, very detailed picture, which is why, as a homeopath, you really need to have the luxury of spending an hour to an hour and a half with each patient, taking their case very, very diligently. When you see a homeopath, they write everything down, and then we spend hours afterwards analysing that case, and then we will come up with one remedy. And it seems a bit disappointing. You've spent all that time talking to your homeopath, and they give you this one little pill, and you think, what the heck? I just paid how much for this pill? And it's one pill? That's the way classical homeopaths work, but it's because we've really analysed to the nth degree what it is about you, and then we give you a medicine that matches your symptoms. So it's not a piece of the disease as such, but for example, if somebody presented to me with a cold, okay, they might have scratchy eyes, they might have a sniffly nose, they might have a bit of a scratchy throat, fairly typical cold. Well, I would prescribe something called Allium cepa for them, which is actually the technical name, or the Latin name for onion, which, if you think about cutting up an onion, you get teary eyes, a bit of a scratchy throat. So it mirrors those symptoms. In homeopathic medicine, we call it like treats like. It's a great question. Thank you very much. Good. Okay, any other questions at all?
Got a gentleman over here that's been waiting.
Yes. I saw you there.
Cancer prevention and hemp, or namely CBDs, cannabinoids.
Yes.
Do you have any research information on that?
Actually, I think there probably is research. I haven't researched it myself recently, so I have... My mic's just gone... Oh, here we are. I'm back again. Back again. Cannabinoids. I have heard, and this is through patients that I know personally, who have had fantastic results with cannabinoids. So, but I don't know what the status of the actual research is, to answer your question fully. But with my cancer patients, I would have no hesitation in recommending this as a course of action. I wouldn't say exclusive action, because I'd also want to see them making the lifestyle changes, because cancer it doesn't just happen in isolation, it is a holistic disease. You've got to address every single angle, as I did with my situation. I addressed mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, everything in order to combat and to come back from the brink of death. So it's the same with cancer, it's the same with any serious chronic disease. You've got to look at throw everything at it, and I wouldn't leave that out of the mix. But thank you. It's a controversial subject, though, isn't it? Ridiculously so. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We have a question here.
Where?
Here.
Oh, hello, sorry, the lights.
Would you like to say anything about the use of clinoptilolite, zeolite powder in water for the use of detoxifying, for example, heavy metals?
Heavy metals.
Or
Yeah, it's chelation. Okay, the question is, what about the use of zeolite and other things? Zeolite is something you can drink, and the idea is that it pulls any heavy metal toxicity out of your system. I think people have had very good results with it. You can also use coriander, which works as an absolutely excellent chelator. So if you have any mercury poisoning, or if you've been exposed to cadmium, lead, or any other heavy metals, coriander also works very, very well. Chlorella works very, very well. Chlorella, you need to make sure that you get split cell wall chlorella, because it is essential that the cell wall of the single cell plant is split open so that you can actually get to the goodness inside it. So if you buy chlorella, make sure that you are getting split cell wall, and it's a patented process. So you need to make sure that you're buying the right stuff. Otherwise, you're just throwing your money down the loo. Okay? Thank you. Good question.
We got a lady over here. Yes.
Ah, yes.
Hi. I was listening to the gentleman before, and it was kind of similar to what I was going to say. It's not so much a question, but it's something I wanted to relate. It's about the use of B17 in apricot kernels.
Uh-huh.
My friend and I take them regularly, but as a maintenance dose. And, you know, we've heard that you can take larger doses and people have cured themselves of cancer. And I just wanted to relate an experience. I have a colleague at work whose sister-in-law had a large tumour on her chest. And I basically advised her to tell her sister-in-law to take high doses of vitamin C, vitamin D, and B17 in the form of apricot kernels. Anyway, I sent her away with the information and didn't think I'd hear anything back. I've since heard, only a few weeks later, the tumour has completely gone. The doctors are completely baffled. And apparently this lady managed to get B17 tablets from America.
Right.
So she must have had the apricot kernels and the B17 tablets, but she took, as I advised, and I'm no expert, it's just based on what I know, vitamin C and vitamin D.
Yeah.
And apparently she's done exactly as I advised, and it's just gone.
Yes.
Completely gone.
That's absolutely marvellous.
And
Thank you for sharing that.
the doctors are just scratching their heads. They haven't got a clue what happened.
Yes,
so
of course.
I'm absolutely chuffed to bits, as you
Yes.
can imagine.
I
So-
think that's it's wonderful, and thank you for sharing that. But I also want to emphasise that supplements alone will not do it for you. You've got to make other lifestyle changes. You've got to do throw everything at it. It's not to be messed around with. Any form of cancer is not to be messed around with, and you've really got to give yourself the best chance you possibly can, and that is by throwing everything you can at the situation. And I wouldn't be, for example, if a patient presented to me and they had a really nicely encapsulated tumour that was easily operable, I would say go for the operation. So it's not always, as I say, I have a foot in both camps. I'm not somebody who will throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I believe the best medicine is the medicine that works. And sometimes, everything that we've developed over the last couple of thousand years or so in medicine is not necessarily all bad. So, there are life-saving surgeries. Let's face it, if you, God forbid, but if you fall over and you break your arm, you're not going to come to me as a homeopath and expect me to set that arm for you and x-ray it and so on. No, I can provide a remedy for you after you make sure that your arm is properly set and all the bones are in the right place. I can happily prescribe Symphytum for you that will make the bones knit faster and your wrist will be fixed within a couple of weeks. That's all good, but you're certainly not going to come to me as the first port of call. So you may well find that you can do certain things in conventional medicine and certain things in complementary medicine, which is why we call it complementary, because it can work happily alongside, as long as you don't get this stupidity of kicking out the baby with the bathwater, where there are certain sectors of conventional medicine, mainly driven by the pharmaceutical industry, that says all complementary medicine is bad, it's unscientific, etc., because it truly isn't. But yeah, thank you. That was really, really interesting.
Thank
Anything
you.
else? Have we still got...
I think we need to wind up now, Jane.
Okay,
Thank you.
fabulous. We shall do that. Thank you very, very much indeed, everybody. It's absolutely marvellous to be here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.